Happy Hanukkah, day 2. Today is the day that we see Mailin B'Kodesh, the idea of going up in holiness. Yesterday we lit one candle, today we light a second candle, and every Jew does this. Even though in the Talmud there's different opinions, some opinions say that the lesser way to do the mitzvah is to light one candle each day, but the Mahadrin, Min HaMahadrin, those that are the most scrupulous in mitzvahs, add one candle per person in the house every day. And for whatever reason, when it comes to Hanukkah, all Jews act in the most scrupulous way. Because in the Festival of Light, the holiday which is about adding light into the world, every Jew is part of bringing more light into Hashem's world. And it's another day of Hanukkah, which means that we have to study Torah, because lahashkicham teirasecha, the Greeks wanted us to forget our relationship to Hashem's divine Torah. And the way we respond is by studying extra on these days of Hanukkah, especially the daily study cycles that we have, including Rambam, and so it takes on extra significance on this day. And what is today's chapter? Hilchos, Parah, Adumah, Perek Asiri, the laws of the red cow, chapter 10. Again, today I'm without my equipment. Today is Friday. By the time I record for tomorrow, for Shabbos, we should be back in the regular place. But for today, I don't have the regular stuff, so just bear with me. We'll learn the Rambam as is. Parah, Adumah, chapter 10 is at the point where we've already dealt with the full preparation process of the Parah, Adumah water. We have the ash, we have the water, and we already put the ash into the water yesterday. That was the topic of Kiddush, of sanctification. Today, we're moving on to the next step. What happens once you have water that's already ready to go for Parah Adumah? What are certain things that you can and cannot do with it? And then towards the end of the chapter, we start getting ready for tomorrow's topic, which is the actual sprinkling of the Parah Adumah water. We'll set the stage with some laws related to the hazah, to the sprinkling. It says the Rambam halacha aleph hamemale mayim lekiddush. When somebody fills up water for sanctification, einay tzarich sheyiyeh hu atzmai hamekadesh vehamazeh. He doesn't have to be the one to then go and sanctify the water and then go sprinkle it. Elo mekadesh echad umazeh acher. There could be one person involved in the filling up of the water, another person involved in the sanctification of the water, and a third person involved in sprinkling the water. V'chein memale adam bikli. Similarly, even if one person is doing multiple parts of the process, he can use different utensils. He can fill up the water in one utensil, and then he can pour the water from one utensil to the other and sanctify the water in the second utensil. And then, if he wants, he can take the holy water once it's been sanctified and pour it into a third utensil, and sprinkle it from that third utensil. The point is that neither the people or the vessels involved in the process don't have to be seen from the beginning to the end. They don't have to be the same people or the same vessels. Halacha beis memale adamayim. A person can fill up Parah Adumah water, in other words, with the intent to sanctify them. Umanichan etzlei b'loi kiddush kol zman sheyirtzeh. He can leave them by him without sanctifying them for as long as he wants. Ve'in bekach klum. There's no problem. He can transfer them from place to place, from city to city. Whenever he wants, he'll put the ashes on them and sanctify them. The point is that any delay between the filling up of the water and sanctification is not a problem. Work, that we've seen, is a problem, but just leaving them is okay. Same thing once you already sanctified the water. A person can leave them by him for days and for years, and keep on sprinkling them whenever he wants or whenever he needs, any day that he needs, until the water finishes. Because as we'll see tomorrow, part of the process was you take a hyssop branch and you dip it into the water. So after enough dips, the water quantity kind of runs out. Same thing, you can transfer the water once it's been sanctified from place to place, from city to city. These things are not disqualifying factors for the Parah Adumah water. Similarly, a person can hold ash of the Parah Adumah by him, and transfer it from place to place, city to city, and whenever he gets water that's qualified for the Parah Adumah, he'll put the ashes into the water. The point is, these are all not disqualifying factors for the ashes and for the waters. Now, says the Rambam, there was one time, they transferred a utensil that had Parah Adumah water in it, in a boat in the Jordan River. And then, later on, it turned out they found an olive-sized portion of corpse in the bottom of the boat, which means that the waters became impure because they were in an impure place. So, even though technically speaking, you're allowed to transfer Parah Adumah water from place to place. After this incident happened, at that point, the High Court in Jerusalem made a decree, she'ein ma'avirin mei chatas, v'loi efer chatas, b'nahar u'visfina. They basically made a decree that just covered the case of the story. They said no transferring Parah Adumah water or Parah Adumah ashes in a river or in a boat. V'lo yishitem al pnei hamayim, nor should you have them float in a utensil on the water. V'lo yamid b'tzad hanar mikan v'yizrikem b'tzad hasheni, nor should you stand on one side of the river and throw them to another side of the river, because that's like having it go over a body of water in a boat. And anything which resembles transferring in a boat is now outlawed because of that one time that they discovered a corpse flesh next to it. Aval, but it doesn't preclude a person from going into the water carrying Parah Adumah water or ash. Oiver hu adam b'mayim ad savarei. A person can go in the water up to his neck, ubiyadei efer para emayim mikudashin, holding Parah Adumah ash or already sanctified water, because that wasn't included in the decree. That's not like a floating boat. The person, when he's in the river, is walking on the ground, the bed of the river. Similarly, if you have a person or empty utensils that are pure on the standard of Parah Adumah, as we'll see later in the set of laws, there's a whole idea of being pure at a different standard for Parah Adumah than regular purity. So a person or utensils that are empty, no Parah Adumah ash or water in them, are pure for chatas. Umayim shenismalu lechatas va'adayin leiniskachu, or water, Parah Adumah water, but it was only filled up and not yet sanctified for the Parah Adumah. Ma'avirin noisan benaru bisfina, they can be placed in a river or in a boat, because again, all of these things don't have the decree, since they don't resemble the exact case that happened in the story where it was already sanctified water. Halacha gimel v'chein ma'avirin mayim mekudashin bisfina b'yam hagadol. Same thing, you can actually take already sanctified water, which is the subject of the decree, but in a different place, in a boat in the Great Sea, not in a river. V'shatin bohen al pnei hamayim, and you can also float with them, swim with them on the water, again in the Yam Hagadol. Shaloi gazru ela al hamayim hamekudashin ba'alo efer ban-nahar, because the decree was only placed on already sanctified water and ash in a river. But if it doesn't meet all those conditions, it's okay. Halacha dalid hamolich mayim lekachon. A person is transferring water of Parah Adumah in order to sanctify them. Needless to say, if it's already been sanctified. When you're transferring Parah Adumah water, at any stage that it is, a special law, you aren't allowed to throw the utensil with the water over your back. It has to be in front of you. Shenemar, because it says, when Torah describes how the Jews would hold on to the Parah Adumah water and ash, it was guarded for sprinkling waters. That means it has to be guarded. When they're guarded, they're classified as sprinkling waters. If not, you don't guard them, you put them behind you, you can't see what's going on with them, they're disqualified. But what if you filled up water in 2 barrels? So here, it's impossible any other way. So you can put them over your shoulder in a way where 1 barrel ends up in front of you and 1 barrel ends up in back of you. That's still called supervising. Halacha hey meichatas sheshkolan b'mishkal. What happens if you have Parah Adumah water and you use them as a weight to figure out the weight of something else? They used to have scales, 2 sides, so they had pre-measured weights that they would put on one side, and when you wanted to weigh out groceries or meat or whatever it was, you put on the other side, and based on this weight, you figured out how much of the product that you were going to sell. So let's say you used Parah Adumah water as the weight to figure out the weight of something else. Says the Rambam, im hisiach daita, if you diverted your mind from the water, you didn't focus on the fact that the Parah Adumah water, while you were weighing them, psulim, disqualified. That's also included in guarding. Guarding means paying attention, keeping focus. So, here you diverted your mind, disqualify the waters, but if you didn't remove your mind, that's kosher. Now that's only if you use the Parah Adumah water as a weight against something else. But if you use the water themselves to determine the weight. This was a process they used to do. You have a cup of water and you put a product into the water. Based on the amount of water it displaces, you figure out the weight of the product. So if you did that, since you made, here you converted the water into a weight. In the last case, it was just being used against something. But here the water itself is serving as the weight. Paslan, you've disqualified them. She'ein zu mishmeres. That's no longer guarding. That's it. Even if if your mind is focused on it, but by the fact that you've used it for something else, you're not guarding it anymore. It says that Rambam kol elu hatahirim, all pure people, shememalin, shemekachin, shemazin, that are involved in Parah Adumah process, either filling up the water, sanctifying it, sprinkling it. V'chein kol hakelim shememalin umekachin bahen umazin bahen v'shemazin bahen. Any utensils that you're using for filling up, for sanctifying, for sprinkling, im hayu tvule yaim, if they had become impure and were only immersed that day, afal pish shelei hariv shimshon, even though sun didn't set yet, Hare ilu kshedim, they're kosher. You saw in chapter 1 already. Shekol maseh Parah v'hamilui v'hakidush v'hazoya, because anything part of the Parah Adumah process, the filling up of the water, the sanctifying, the sprinkling, kosher b'tvuliyim kamesha b'yarnu, is kosher to be done with things that had been immersed that day, as we explained. In fact, when we pnei atzdukim, just to spite, just to show that the Sadducees were wrong, because they held that you couldn't do it with the tvuliyim, mitamin as kol klei shetef, we would purposely make impure all immersible utensils, and put them in the mikvah, and then use them with Parah Adumah water, just to show the authenticity of the oral tradition, unlike the Sadducees held. Halacha vav hakol kshedim lahazos. Now we move on to setting the stage for sprinkling. Hakol kshedim lahazos. Everybody is kosher to do the sprinkling of the Parah Adumah water. Chutz me isha, except for a woman. Betumtum, a person whose genital area is covered. Ba'andregenes, or hermaphrodite. Betinoik she'ein baidas, and a child who doesn't have enough maturity to have the kavanah, the intent, as we saw yesterday, also when it comes to sanctifying the water, you have to have intent. Sprinkling also has to have intent. So since a child is not old enough to have intent, he cannot do it. Avol katan sheyesh baidas, but if he's a little bit older and he could have intent, kosher lahazos, he's kosher to have the ability to sprinkle the Parah Adumah water. V'ha'ardal kosher lahazos she'eino ardal tameh, an uncircumcised Jew is kosher to be involved in sprinkling because he's not called impure. Katan sheyesh baidas, shehiza, interesting case. Let's say you have a child who has enough intent, who has enough maturity to have intent, and he's sprinkling Parah Adumah water. And a woman is helping him. A woman is totally disqualified. Let's say she held the water, and he's dipping the hyssop branch and sprinkling it. So, interestingly, even though she's involved, his sprinkling is kosher. As long as she doesn't hold his hand during the sprinkling. If she does, sprinkling is disqualified because she's been part of it, and a woman cannot be part of the sprinkling. Halacha zayin hamazet tzarich lihiskavein. The person sprinkling has to have intent, ulahazes ala tamei latare, and sprinkle on the person who is impure with the intent to make him pure. V'im hiza shalei bekavana hazayasei psula. If you sprinkle without intent, disqualified sprinkling. Avol zeh shemazin ala, but the person being sprinkled upon, einei tzarich kavana, he doesn't need to have intent. Elamazin ala adam l'daitoi v'shalei l'daitoi. You can sprinkle Parah Adumah water on a person with his intent, without his intent, with his awareness, without his awareness. Doesn't make a difference. You become pure if Parah Adumah water reaches you. Hamiskabin lahazis lefanov v'hiza la'acharav. Let's say a person was trying to sprinkle on utensils that were in front of him, and in the end the sprinkling went backward. La'acharav v'hiza lefanov. Or he's trying to sprinkle backward, it goes forward. Hazayasei psula, disqualified, because that's like sprinkling without intent. The water, which the vessels which the water reached, that wasn't your intent to reach them. If you had in mind to sprinkle directly in front of you, you ended up sprinkling to the side in front of you. That's kosher, because that's still called fulfilling your intent. Your intent was to go forward. Okay, you didn't go due forward, you went a little to the right, that's fine. When a person sprinkles the water on the person who's impure, he doesn't have to re-immerse the hyssop into the bowl every time. In certain cases, you have to. So with the mitzvah, when it came to the Parah Adumah water, the Parah Adumah itself, the blood, in the beginning of these laws, you got to sprinkle 7 times towards the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Each time you have to immerse again into the blood. But with the sprinkling, you don't have to. You dip the hyssop branch into the water, and you keep sprinkling again and again until the water finishes. You can also sprinkle onto multiple people at once, or multiple vessels at once. Even 100. Anybody or any utensil that was touched by the water, even the slightest amount, as we'll see tomorrow, taher becomes pure. So long as, again, the person sprinkling had in mind that the water should reach you. Let's say a person puts the hyssop branch into the water, getting ready to sprinkle. And and he wanted to sprinkle it on something, a utensil which could become impure and did become impure, or on a person. And he ends up, he sprinkles from that immersion on something which cannot become impure, like stone, or an animal. And now, after having done that sprinkling, he wants to take the water that remains on the hyssop and go back and sprinkle on the originally intended people or utensils. It says that if water remains on the hyssop, he need not re-immerse it. Just whatever remains, sprinkle it on the person or on the utensils that are impure. When you originally immersed the ezev, that's what you had in mind. It was a kosher intent at the beginning. The sprinkling itself was, a little distracted, but now you come back to it with the original water, you're good. But let's say you had immersed the hyssop to begin with, with the intent to sprinkle it on an object which cannot become impure, or on an animal. And then in the end, by mistake, without intent, you sprinkle it on a person or on a utensil that's actually impure, that's disqualified sprinkling. Till you re-dip the hyssop branch again a second time, and have in mind at the time of the immersion that you want to sprinkle with this on a person or on an object which can become impure. Halacha tes, let's say a person immersed the hyssop branch in the water, and he had in mind to sprinkle on something which is not able to become impure, which we just said, that means that you cannot now take it and sprinkle it on something which is actually impure until you redip it again. Nevertheless, says the Rambam, hamayim haminatfin kshedim. Water that drips from it, from the hyssop, is kosher. In other words, if it drips back from the hyssop into the utensil, it's still kosher water inherently. Therefore, if it re-dripped into the utensil, which is holding the water, it fell back in. And you re-dip the ezev into it, with the intent now to sprinkle it on a proper thing, on a object which became impure. Your new sprinkling is kosher. Point is, it's only the act of sprinkling which follows this wrong immersion that's a problem. But the water itself doesn't become inherently problematic. Let's say you had a bowl full of water, Parah Adumah water, and you're immersing and you're sprinkling, dipping and sprinkling, and now you have less than the quantity required for sprinkling. The quantity of water went down. You can keep on dipping, even if all you're getting is the very edge of the hyssop branch, and keep sprinkling. As long as you're not sponging, in other words, you're not like putting the hyssop branch and kind of cleaning the water off of the wall of the utensil. As long as you're still dipping and getting water, you're good. And then Rambam concludes with the following case. If you have a jug, which has a very narrow mouth, which you're using for Parah Adumah water, you can dip the hyssop branch into it, take it out normally, and sprinkle. You don't have to be careful. Maybe when you re-dip it a second time, you're going to touch the sides of the utensil. What does that mean? The Rambam says elsewhere in his commentary to the Mishnah that, let's say it's a very narrow mouth, right? So when you put the branch in, chances are when you pull it out, some of the water remains there. Now when you come a second time, the hyssop branch is collecting water in a way other than tevila, other than dipping. You don't have to worry about that. When you put it back in a second time, it'll collect the water at the bottom, which will be an actual dip, and then you'll sprinkle that water and it'll be a kosher sprinkling.